I was looking at my analytics the other day, and it turns out only about 1 in 5 people who watch my videos is actually subscribed to them. So if you haven't subscribed yet and you feel that I've earned it and you like to watch my content, it would mean a ton to me if you went ahead and did that. I promise I will not ask every beginning of every video. I usually ask at the end, but a lot of people don't make it all the way there, so figured I'd get in early on this one and do that. So again, thank you very much for your support. It means a lot. In order to continue growing the channel, please make sure you click that subscribe button so I know I should keep putting out content. Thanks. Today we're at a bit of a different camera angle because it is time that I address this. You've seen my lathe before. I quite like it. It's a good little piece of equipment. The stand it comes with, however, is not great. You can see it's just a catastrophe of storage. There's dust everywhere. Normally I would clean this up for a video, but I thought I would show you its more organic nature. And I was really reticent to build a big lathe stand because I know I'm moving relatively soon and didn't want to have to schlep it. But then I realized I'm just going to have to move this thing anyway, and the advantage of a lathe stand with built-in storage is I can store stuff in it while I'm moving, as opposed to this, which is just annoying dead space. So, some family friends just dropped off a bunch of old construction lumber that they were getting rid of anyway. And I thought that would be the perfect excuse to turn it into a really robust, solid workbench to hold this lathe. It's going to be pretty closely based off of Marius Hornberger's lathe stand that he built for his metal lathe, where it's just a very solid piece, all built with joinery. I'm making a couple tweaks because obviously I've got some issues going on that he didn't have to deal with. For instance, the switch and the motor are both sort of integrated into this top plank, which I would like to get rid of. So I'm going to have to figure out a way to work these through whatever top I make. There's going to be a door on this side to hold the motor, as well as whatever else can fit underneath it. There's going to be 3 drawers in the middle, probably one that's bigger and 2 that are smaller, but I might change that, we'll see. And then another set of doors at the end to hold maybe bowl blanks or other larger pieces. Let's start by milling up a whole lot of lumber into 1.5 by 3 inch cleaned up pieces. As usual, the first step was to cut the rough lumber to approximate length on the chop saw, then onto the jointer to get a face and edge flat and square. Then onto the table saw to rip the second edge. You could also do this on the planer if you wanted to, but I tend to use the table saw for it, it's just easier for me. And onto the planer to get the second face parallel to the first, and also nice and flat. Here I am checking all of the pieces that I'm going to be gluing together for the legs, making sure the grain was lined up. Then it was just a matter of applying the glue and clamping them together tightly. The next big step was to cut all of the tenons on the various cross pieces that would make up the face frame and back frame of the cabinet. Like you've seen me do before, all I did was cut a series of shallow cuts along each side of the ends of each of the boards that I needed to cut a tenon into. In between steps, I went ahead and got the lathe taken off the old stand. You can see how beat up the end was here, especially how little end support there was under the main body of the lathe and where the motor was mounted. Next up, I went to mark the mortises that I'd have to cut to match the tenons that I'd already just made. Now to cut these mortises, I'm going to use my new secret weapon. This is a tool called a hollow chisel mortiser. It is similar to a drill press in a lot of ways in that there's a chuck in here that will hold on to a drill bit, but it's not a normal type of drill bit. It's called a hollow chisel. Looks something like this. And you can see that there's a drill bit that goes down the center, and then at the, kind of as the shell, there is this square chisel with the 4 sharp sides. And the effect is the auger bit here hogs out all the material, and then these sharp chisels carve the sides out. And the end result is a fairly neat square or rectangular mortise. And so you can see on my test piece here that creates, pretty much with no cleanup, a really well-fitting mortise and tenon joint. once I got into the rhythm of cutting the mortises, it actually went really quickly. And it's just a lot tidier than having to deal with a round bit that wanders a little bit. One thing I did notice was when I had to torque down repeatedly on that lever, especially because I had the mortiser relatively high up on my workbench, it was painful after a while. It requires a lot of force. I was definitely sore for the next few days. That is the face frame and the back face frame, butt frame. Now I need to cut the mortises for these guys into the legs, and then we will have most of a piece of furniture. So all the legs are mortised, and now it's just a matter of trying to fit this whole thing together. So let me see if I can do that. Now there is not an ounce of glue or metal or anything in this. And I can sit on it and it doesn't even make a sound. Now I'd say I'm pretty pleased with that. I'm going to next figure out how to put in the 3/4 inch plywood that's going to be the bottom. I think 3/4 inch, I think I have enough. If not, something else. The back panels, which will just be out of probably 3/4 inch ply, not positive yet. And you may notice too, compared to the old lathe stand, remember this had a piece of 1/2 inch ply with the lathe on top. This is going to be pretty close to exactly the same height. I think it'll be bumped up, the lathe itself will be bumped up maybe 1/2 inch, which is nice because it was always a little bit low for me. To cut the notch at the bottom to hold the plywood that would make up the floor of the cabinet, all I did was make one cut on the table saw, rotate the cross piece 90 degrees, and then make the second cut. And that made a square groove that was the right dimension. I then went through the somewhat tedious process of going back and forth to the table saw, trimming down the width and length of this piece of plywood, just so I could try to get it to fit perfectly. I really wanted to sneak up on the cut so I didn't accidentally overdo it and make it too small, because I didn't have a ton of plywood to waste. So now that I have the bottom fitted, the next thing I need to start doing is cutting all the grooves along the legs and frame to allow the side panels and back panels to go in. I sort of screwed myself here by doing the bottom the way I did because I wanted this to sit flush at the bottom, which is fine, except it means it's essentially going to be really, really annoying to put a groove in at the bottom. So I think I'm just going to not. That seems like a good solution. Ideally I would have it there, but I think between a glue joint on the bottom face of the panels and then have them grouped in everywhere else, should probably be fine. The panels add some strength, but they're mostly there just for containing things. So I'm going to use one of these as a test piece to make sure I get the fit right, and then I think I'm just going to set it up to do a series of cuts on the table saw. Normally I think the router would be the way to go here, but for the really long cuts, my router table is just not in a good position. So I'm just going to suck it up and use the table saw. The convenient thing about this is that the plywood I'm using for the panels is just a tiny, tiny bit narrower than the tenons, so I can just use where the tenons are as a guide for where I need to make these groove cuts. I just got into the zone and started going through and fitting all the panels. It's not terribly interesting to watch, it's mostly me swearing because something doesn't quite fit and I have to go sneak up on the correct size. But I think I've got it to where it works out pretty well now. I've got a couple things that just really don't want to sit square. That's the danger of using old 2x4s, is they're all twisted and whatever, no matter what you, how you plane them or anything. But I think once it's all a unit, it'll go well. I also learned a lot about how I need to assemble this when I go to glue it together, because the way I did it here will not work. Well, I'm going to figure it out. So this is pretty much all the half-inch plywood I had. I had to use a piece of just crappy 2111. It was a little bit thicker than half an inch. I think it was like 9/16 but all I did was just run it vertically along the table saw to trim down the width, and that works fine. This part in the middle is going to be drawers, so I don't really care what the inside faces look like. So that's all good. I don't really care what the inside faces of it look like anywhere, because it's all crappy plywood, but it will do the job just fine. This piece is just a hair bit short of what it should be. That's just because I ran out of wood. So that's what it's going to be. That's half an inch of clearance right where the motor is. It's probably good that it gets a little bit of extra air anyway in there. I think we'll just pretend that that's a feature and move on. So the next big step is to glue this thing together. Gluing these together actually wasn't too bad. I just had to check for square constantly. At one point, you see me putting this clamp diagonally just to help nudge it about 1/16 of an inch to offset any of the racking that was happening. Other than that, didn't have too many issues. This part was a lot harder when we had to kind of line everything up while it was floating, and then try to get everything together. Called my dad out to help me. Probably took us about 45 minutes and a lot of swearing, but we were eventually able to get everything lined up correctly. And you can see where I got my bald spot from. Alright, now I just gotta let this glue dry, and then tomorrow I will start working on the top. I think I'm going to do the doors, drawers, drawer fronts, accessories all in a separate video, just because this one's going to get pretty long as it is. So I will focus on finishing the actual piece of furniture and getting the lathe mounted to it. And everything else will be after the fact. Alright, so now I've got the clamps removed and I've got the top just loosely attached. These aren't even joined together yet, because I'm trying to figure out how much, if any, I should trim off of this and where I want the lathe itself to be mounted. My one big concern is making sure I have room in the front to lever down on the tools a little bit, as you often do with the lathe. So let me get the lathe on here and kind of mime the normal motions I'm going to have to go through to see what'll work. Lift with the legs. So I think somewhere in the vicinity is going to be about right. So I probably could get away with having it even closer to center. I'm actually mostly worried about whenever I'm doing something like the inside of a bowl where you kind of have to lean around. If it's all the way in the center, it means I'm leaning 8 or 10 inches over the side of the table, which is just going to get really uncomfortable. So I think having just a couple inches here is probably the way to go. This glue joint doesn't need to be all that good because it's all going to be fastened down anyway, so I'm just going to edge join them. I'm not even going to bother with biscuits or anything. These screws are very temporary. You'll see what I'm doing in just a second, but that's just to hold everything in place for now. It's starting to look like something. Now to fasten the top. So my grand plan to attach the corners is to use a technique I'm stealing from boat building called a trunnel. It's spelled like tree nail, which is essentially a dowel, as you can see, with a slot cut in it that you then drive a wedge into. There's no glue or anything in this joint. That I just did as a proof of concept, and that is not going anywhere. So my plan is to cut a bunch of these dowels. I'll probably just use 4 of them, 1 in each leg. I'll glue them into the leg, then have the wedge on top. And when I do this properly, the wedge will be perpendicular to the grain to keep it strong. This was just quick and dirty. And so I'm pretty confident that that'll hold everything. I've never seen a tabletop done like that before. It might explode in a few years because of wood movement. I'm not all that concerned about it. It's not that hard to replace 4 2x6s. So yeah, get that going. And if it needs more support, I can put in some smaller pegs along the rails, but I really don't think it will. think there's really only one proper way to celebrate such a momentous occasion as this. Oh! It's really rigid. That hurt. Good sign though. Yeah, not even a wiggle in this thing. It is a tank. The process of mounting the motor was pretty much impossible to film because it was mostly me sitting in a position like this. Needless to say, it took a lot of work, and I probably should have done it before I mounted the top. But lessons learned from next time. So I think I'm going to start with some small pilot hole just to see where the holes are going to land on the other side. I am going to have to move the lathe, which is annoying, but not that big a deal. With the help of a ratchet strap, I was able to get the motor held up in place, and that was really what allowed me to actually make all the attachments. And then finally, I made a little switch cover for the toggle out of some scrap mahogany I had. It's just a rectangle with beveled edges and a couple of holes drilled through it. No big deal. And then I screwed it on with some antique brass screws I had lying around. Alrighty, a little disappointing I wasn't able to get the new belt in time for this, but it's the way it goes sometimes. I think that is going to be it for part one of this, hopefully two-part series. Stay tuned for the next one. It will include the making of the doors and drawer boxes and drawer fronts, and any other accessories that I decide to put on here. And I hopefully will have that out within the next couple of weeks. If you haven't subscribed yet and you feel that I've earned it, please make sure that you do. It means a huge amount to me, and really will help me keep growing the channel. So that's about it. We'll see you next time, and we'll make some more stuff. Have a good one.